Thank you to Reverend Blake for those words. It's a great honor to speak to Ethics in Tech on this event on the eve of June 10th. I'm based here in Washington, DC. And I work for Human Rights Watch. We've just issued a big report about Tulsa and the race massacre that happened there 99 years ago this weekend. It feels like the weight of history is bearing down on us at the moment with what is happening at the moment on the streets, but also what has just happened so quickly in recent weeks with the pandemic. It's having an impact on my life, as I'm sure it is on all of yours. And it makes it probably challenging to think, how can we talk about campaigning to stop killer robots? But I'll say a few words about the campaign, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers. I thought just in my remarks that I would cover the what exactly are we talking about here with killer robots, the terminology, the why, and what are we actually trying to achieve with the campaign, and why now? How are we going to pull this off? There's a lot more that I could say, but so this is just going to touch on the surface, really. But we've taken a lot of heat since the campaign was initiated for our name, the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots. It was a deliberate decision by Human Rights Watch and the other non-governmental organizations that co-founded this coalition of organizations to go with that name. It's been a conversation starter. It's certainly an attention getter. And it's one that has enabled us to begin a dialogue, not just with governments, but also with the public. So we make no apologies for the name. And if you want to know the technical term of what the governments describe as killer robots, it's lethal autonomous weapons systems. And that is basically killer robots. The campaign was established in 2013 because we could see autonomy being incorporated into weapon systems already at that point. And as I was thinking about how to give these remarks in the context of a serious conversation, but also one that ends with comedians, I looked through a new report called Slippery Slope that colleagues and another co-founder of the campaign, Pax, put together last November, and it surveys the arms industry and increasing autonomy in weapon systems. When I was looking through this report, they give many examples of weapon systems that are in development today, and some are autonomous systems that are not yet weaponized. But I thought I'd just read off some of the names for you so that you could see what some major defense contractors are calling their weapon systems in cooperation with the US military and other countries. Of course, we're familiar with the Reaper and the Predator armed drones that were introduced at the beginning of the 2000s in Afghanistan and have been used in other attacks elsewhere. We're now seeing loitering munitions, ones that can loiter in the air and look for targets to attack. There's the Switchblade loitering munition. There's the War Mate, the Harpy. There are also autonomous fighter aircraft that are being developed, such as the Tyrannus, which is a very large autonomous fighter aircraft that will fly over a great distance. And this raises the question of what happens when it drops out of communications range. What do you program the computer on board to do? This is one of the drivers towards autonomy in weapon systems, is the distance, is the speed of weapon systems. And what happens when you can no longer communicate with the system on board. There's the Sea Hunter, an autonomous ship that is traveling the Pacific Ocean right now with no humans on board. They're instead following it in a training ship that is monitoring the ship's movements. And it's not armed yet, but this is another example for us. And then there's now the development of what we call swarms of much smaller autonomous weapon systems with some crazy names. I was looking through the report at the Gremlins and the Skyborgs. These are weapon systems that will be deployed en masse, not just in one single weapon system, but multiple ones. And all of this for us raises the question of human control. And what is the nature of human control over not just the entire weapon system? How is it programmed to manufacture? Is it the commander that sends it out? But what is the human control over the process of selecting a target and then firing on it? Those are the functions that we want to see remain under meaningful human control. So we see many different examples of autonomy in weapon systems, very big investments that have been led by the United States. China, of course, is investing, as is Russia, France, the United Kingdom, the permanent 5 members of the Security Council. We also see significant investments in autonomous weapon systems by Israel and South Korea, the robot nations. And now we're starting to see some worrisome developments coming from Iran and Turkey. But I could spend all of my time worrying about the various weapon systems that are coming out, or we could focus on what we're going to do about it, which is the purpose of the campaign to stop killer robots. So since the campaign was launched, there have been multiple debates that have come into being. One is the legal debate over the clarity of existing law and whether it is sufficient or not to deal with this significant threat to not just civilians in warfare, but also human dignity in policing and law enforcement, border control. There are many circumstances in which fully autonomous weapon systems could be deployed. I was looking at a report just today about policing and the proper management of assemblies. It was issued by the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and Association. And that report found that there's a growing range of weapons that are remote controlled that are becoming available, particularly in the context of policing of assemblies, and it urges great caution. It contains this line saying that where advanced technology is employed, law enforcement officers must at all times remain personally in control of the actual delivery or release of force. And it's this notion of human control that cuts across everything in terms of the debate right now. We've got some really big ethical concerns that have been raised, not least by developing countries who are saying, well, if this is what's coming next, we want no part of it. These are high-tech weapons that are being developed and that could end up being used on us in low-tech states. I'd say that the developing countries led by Pakistan, Cuba, and other countries from Latin America, from Africa, the Holy See, these are the countries who want to see regulation of fully autonomous weapons in the form of a new international treaty. And 30 of those countries seek a ban treaty, which is what the campaign to stop killer robots also desires. There is a desperate need to create the new treaty in order to provide operational guidance and to ensure accountability over individual attacks. But I think most important is the moral imperative to deal with autonomous weapon systems. And this notion that delegating life and death decisions to a machine is immoral and should not be done. This is because any killing orchestrated by a machine is arguably wrong, since machines cannot exercise human judgment or compassion. They're not endowed with reason or intellect. Humans are uniquely qualified to make moral decisions over the use of force, over the taking of another human life. And this is really the whole crux of the matter here. So when we talk about the international treaty, you often hear it'll be a ban treaty, it will take away something, but what it is seeking to take away is actually quite a positive thing. It's trying to prevent the deployment of weapon systems that lack that meaningful human control. So we want to establish the principle of human control over the use of force. We are in an interesting time, as we've heard already. Right now, we have the pandemic. We also face other major threats to humanity: climate change, nuclear weapons. And for the last few years, we've been trying to get the killer robots threat up the international agenda. And I would say that it's now up there and regarded as another pressing threat to humanity that must be managed. It's a massive risk. It's truly a global threat in that eventually everybody will be threatened by fully autonomous weapons. It's one that requires an urgent multilateral response. We didn't start the campaign to stop killer robots to have a debate. We're really glad to see all of the different debates that it has spurred, but we created it to establish regulation in the form of a new international treaty. And in our view, there are going to be areas of emerging tech and artificial intelligence that require rules. And this is probably one of the most pertinent examples. We are in a situation, though, where the diplomacy, there have been, I think, 8 meetings on killer robots at the United Nations in Geneva since 2014. And those meetings have involved not just a half dozen countries, but more than 90 nations have participated in these talks, along with the International Committee of the Red Cross, UN actors, a whole lot of academics, and then our campaign to stop killer robots. They truly are a multilateral deliberation. Where they stall, though, is on what to do about this threat. And that's because of the consensus-based nature of the decision-making forum that they're in. And we see at the United Nations that decisions by consensus often lead to the lowest common denominator decision, where you have to get to the real bottom of the agreement in order to get everybody to agree. And in this particular forum, we see that consensus is not applied equally, that certain countries, certain military powers, mainly the P5 from the Security Council, their views are what really carry the day. Smaller nations are not heard from as much. And that's why, for us, it's so important to encourage cooperation between like-minded countries, to get a core group of countries together that will help to lead the way towards the international treaty. And so while the diplomacy stumbles along, and it's digital at the moment, there are no meetings at the UN in Geneva at the present, and I think in New York this year is the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. There was a whole lot of very big, important events planned for the opening this year. Much of it looks now like it will have to be virtual due to the pandemic. So in a way, the diplomacy is on hold, but that doesn't mean that our engagement is on hold. So there's an awful lot of activity going on by campaigners in capitals to try and reach political leaders, to try and get their attention and get their support for launching negotiations. We see some champions starting to emerge, at least in rhetoric, from Germany's foreign minister to the governments in Finland. Norway will change next year. I think Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau actually asked his foreign minister to seek an international treaty to ban killer robots. And while that's really important words on paper, they haven't yet been acted upon. And of course, the diplomacy for the United States right now is pretty much stalled with the leadership in office at the moment. The United States participates in the talks on killer robots, but it does not want to see any outcome. Basically, it says that it is premature to decide where these talks should go when we're still trying to figure out here the parameters of this. That's exactly what Russia says as well, that we cannot possibly move too soon. On our point of view, we see these developments coming together very quickly, and we're getting frustrated with that. So we're about at the point where there's going to have to be a break. And we may end up having to negotiate the treaty outside of United Nations auspices, potentially without the United States or Russia involved. And that would be a real shame, because we do want to have major powers involved in these agreements. But there are other ways to bring them in line, and I guess this is my experience from the campaign to create the international treaty banning landmines, as well as the Cluster Munition Convention, is that those are two pieces of international law that lack signatures from some of the major powers who have such weapons, but they also include many countries that once stockpiled and perhaps used those weapons. But they set a strong standard, they set a norm, they set something that everybody has to aspire to and to try to abide by. The other work that we're doing at the moment is very much, I think, exploring the different, we're still ourselves learning about autonomy and weapon systems and the technology and how it can be used to target certain individuals or groups of people. That's a very dangerous prospect, and that's one that we do not want to see misused or used at all. We're also doing a lot of work to engage with youth at the moment, from students to scouts, and that work was awarded this week with a Peace Prize from the city of Ypres in Belgium, which was a city that was affected by World War I and World War II, saw the use of chemical weapons, of landmines and other explosive weapons. And they have a Peace Prize that the children of the city get to vote on. This year, they voted for the campaign to stop killer robots. So I'm hopeful that that's a sign that the students, the children, understand this issue. I do not wish for us to have to leave it to them to try and figure out how we're going to resolve it. But it does give me hope for the future in that respect. That's pretty much all that I wanted to say. We did have Marta Kosmina, who spoke to you at previous ethics and tech events, and I really do miss Marta. She was not, she was consultant, so not a kind of permanent staff member, and is no longer doing that role. That was an important role for us to be able to engage with the tech sector out there on the West Coast, and we do hope to replace that capacity soon, because we need to have that support if we're going to be able to push this over the line. And we're very grateful for the support that individual artificial intelligence experts and roboticists have shown to this campaign to stop killer robots, as well as the tech workers at Google and some of the other major corporations who are supporting us as well from the sidelines. We have to create a very big tent campaign here, which is representative and truly global. So we're also reaching out to technologists across the global South. A lot of them are not called artificial intelligence experts, but just computer scientists. You know, they're in universities. They are there though, and we're looking for them. We're trying to connect them with the Nobel Peace Laureates, with the faith leaders, with the non-governmental organizations, human rights groups, humanitarian organizations that are part of this campaign, so that we can pull this off in the very near future. So please watch this space. Please check out the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots website and our social media channels. And I really hope that we can do more of these events, Vahid, and I really appreciate the work and the leadership that you've shown out in California.